Hello, friends. Welcome back to Gamers Gab, the podcast by gamers for gamers. It's your local NB Artsy from the Artsy Gamer, and as promised, we're celebrating the Artsy Gamer reaching the first of many subscriber goals with the episode everyone has been waiting for, the big 1K Q&A with myself and HubsMod, ruler of the chat, first in his name, love of my life, eater of pastries, father of our spawn, I always forget the other one. Well, I guess interviewee. Guest of Gamers Gab. There you go. But before we get into the Q&A, before we have HubsMod wow us with his teacher aura, the topic of today's episode revolves around the unexpected educational benefits of video games. We're not talking about the education software with gaming components, but the games like those in the Animal Crossing franchise, Stardew Valley, Stellaris, BioWare's Mass Effect series, and more that have the ability to promote learning that is applicable to not only everyday life, but professionally. But before we get started with that HubsMod, since the most that people have only seen or heard is you in the background during my live streams or like a hand reveal, if you would, introduce yourself.
Oh. I am HubsMod, ruler of the chat, first in my name, love of Artsy's life, father of our spawn, interviewee of Gamers Gab. And I have been a teacher, since I graduated college. I spent more than a decade now out of the United States. Half a decade in Europe, in Rome, Italy, and now in South Korea. Or at least one of the Koreas.
Jelly will never live that down.
Nope. We get lots of laughter out of it, and I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. So, but you've been a gamer longer than you've been a teacher, though.
Oh, yeah. My earliest memories of gaming were when I was 2 years old, just mashing buttons on my dad's Civilization game.
Yeah? So do you feel that, before we get into the main talking points, do you feel that gaming has educational applications?
Absolutely. All game playing has educational applications. In that sense, perhaps the gaming, since it's in front of a screen, has the feelings about just mindlessly watching TV imprinted onto it. But unlike watching TV, you're doing something when you play a game. And when you do something, you're training a skill.
You have a master's degree in education and also with technology being incorporated into your teaching. And so from the main talking point that we're going to get started with this Gamers Gab episode is, from a teacher's perspective, what are the unrealized educational benefits in playing video games?
Well, that's a huge topic, and we could probably spend multiple episodes breaking that question down. But in summary, it's skill building. You play a game such as Mass Effect, which you said in your intro, and it's a shooter game. So you're developing reactions and reflexes and your ability to analyze things in a blink of an eye and make snap decisions. You play something like Civilization or Stellaris or another strategy game, and you're developing your ability to plan ahead and anticipate consequences of your actions.
Yeah, from a conflict resolution perspective, I think that's the games that I gravitate towards, and where people don't know this about you and our relationship, but the fact that when you introduced me to gaming, and yes, it is all HubsMod's fault, that the games that I gravitate toward have more to do with relationship building, design stuff, but from the conflict resolution perspective, and perhaps in a similar way that a teaching perspective can look at gaming, is consequences of actions. And the fact that the games that really do linger and stay with us for years are the ones where it's not just a linear storyline where you could pick this thing and it goes to a typical ending. It's that your endings are based on your path, which is, I think, a life lesson. But as you had mentioned, that the concept of video games are often very polarized from those who consider it as like mindless TV watching. And we'll get into the discussion of tech time and screen time in a bit, but How are the opinions of video games polarized as being beneficial versus mind-numbing? And what are the ways that we can challenge the notion that gaming is a waste of time?
Well, let's break that down into one question instead of two. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Ooh, let's tackle the opinions of video games being as being a polarized. Like, there isn't really a center gray area. It's either that games are incredibly beneficial versus games are incredibly numbing and a waste of time.
So I would say a lot of times the negative outlook on games is more than just numbing and a waste of time, but actively harmful. You take example of video games being used to try to explain school shootings, specifically starting with Columbine. And from there, it's, when Grand Theft Auto came out, when Grand Theft Auto 3, when I was in high school, or the ended up with like, oh, you can run around and drive cars and shoot people, and that's terrible because kids are going to run around and steal cars and shoot people. And of course, that didn't happen. And anytime a relatively violent video game came out, you always had that on the extreme negative end. But violence is glorified in all American cultural media, I would say. So in that sense, it wasn't any different. But, and I think you can actually, I don't remember the study off the top of my head. I know it came out probably a little more than 10 years ago now, where it was looking at the people who grew up playing video games and their reaction time when actually driving cars physically on the road. And it was showing that our generation at our age were could react faster when behind the wheel than people who did not grow up with video games, just simply due to skills such as reflex time being trained by playing games that require high reflexes.
Yeah, let's talk about violence in video games, because you
Sure.
are also the one that introduced me to BioWare's Mass Effect series during a time where I was transitioning from being a grad student and an unpaid intern to actually having my first big hit job. And I'm not going to, dox anybody, but I had a really bad boss. And I got so good at headshots from the Mass Effect series because of how frustrating my work environment was, but I didn't want to go into my workplace and actually harm my boss. So what from that aspect, because I do think we tend to stigmatize a person's thoughts versus their actions. What do you feel from an educational perspective can be learned from experiencing or replicating violence in a place that has no consequences?
So, as you just said, thoughts are not the same thing as actions, and that goes well beyond simply violence in video games. So the idea that, if you engage in mindless killing in a video game because there are no consequences, that makes you a violent person. Or, we can go all the way back to the satanic panic of the 80s and talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and playing that makes you going to summon demons and turn away from whatever religion you're a part of. I wish. So this idea that, our thoughts are just as weighty as the actions that we take, or if we think something, that means we will do it, is a plague in society, in my opinion. But just circle back to violent video games. Unfortunately, I think I lost the thread of the actual question being asked. I have a tendency to ramble.
Oh, like me. It's okay. That's why we're married. It's all right. Well, if it comes back to you, we can read
the question so that I can
reread it. How are the opinions of video games polarized as being beneficial versus mind numbing? And so we had moved to
it was the violence.
Oh, from a teacher's perspective, how can we? Oh wow, I think I lost my train of thought. We both have pregnancy brain, friends. Okay. No, I think it had. It had more to do with this notion that action, like the thoughts are the same weight as actions, and that, you know, playing violent games means that you're a violent person. You had mentioned that you felt that it was a plague on society to shame people for that. Also, that feels like it's a bit of a religious implication that society holds us to these standards of our thoughts that no one can hear. And so when we play games, it's like, oh, well, you play the shooter game, and you know, you work with children, and therefore you're going to be violent, or you're not fit to be around people.
It's a morality police sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I won't go and ramble about my feelings on X. It's not really pertinent to the the discussion at hand. What we're wanting to look at is specifically video games.
Well, sure. But then we can challenge that as if we do place and morally police gaming in society as, you know, being a waste of time. And what are the ways that you feel as an educator that we can challenge that?
It takes well, as an educator, it takes education. You can't simply say, "Oh no, video games aren't a waste of time." You want to be able to demonstrate the benefits that have come from it. So, my vocabulary has been greatly expanded by playing strategy games, to the point where I think the biggest one that stands out in my mind is proving my sixth grade teacher that I knew what the term mutually exclusive meant and could use it appropriately in a sentence when she told me I didn't know how to use that word because I had encountered it in a video game and needed to understand what that meant in order to actually play the game, or play it well. Other examples, I have students now who even who've played Minecraft, and from that learn how to skin things, and from that it's going to lead into careers in 3D modeling. Um, Playing games such as Factorio, which require you to lay out an entire process chain to make the components you need to build a rocket, requires a heck of a lot of forward planning. And if you talk to the people who or adults that play that game, well, they're all in engineering and supply chain management and things like that. It's because the skills that you develop in this game lead very strongly into careers that require those types of skills.
So I was actually going to feed this into the Factorio conversation
Yeah.
because it was within like the first couple of years that we were in Korea, and I think you were required by your school in order to have like an after school activity or run a club or something. And you convinced your school that you would do an after school Factorio club that allowed kids to come in and play games and work together. So let's first talk about how you convinced your school to do that, and we'll go into the final, like what your thoughts were about running that club and the benefits that came from it.
Well, I convinced the school to do it because I got 9 kids to sign up for it.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
but I was able to show that there is an educational
mhm.
standpoint from just exactly what I said, that it teaches process flow, and that's used in mathematics, it's used in coding, it's used in science, it's used in engineering. Being able to lay out a plan to get from point A to point Z, because you have to go through points B through Y to get there, is incredibly important, and it helps build really any skill. If you can see the big picture and how everything breaks down, you will be much more successful than if you've just memorized each piece individually.
Did you happen to measure whether or not your students had improved academically from being part of the Factorio club at all?
Um, Unfortunately, no, because ninth graders are more interested in playing the game usually than they are in learning the underlying strategy. I
Uh,
think I targeted the kids that I was teaching at the time for the club because I
mhm.
wasn't teaching seniors. And had I been teaching seniors, I probably would have been able to help them look at the underlying need of the game rather than just the run around and shoot things aspect of it that also exists in that game. So in that sense, I wasn't successful in what I was going for, mostly due to the maturity of the students. But I think if I were able to restart the club, get some older kids, and focus on it more from the educational standpoint rather than trying to get them excited in the game to make the club start in the first place, it would be more successful.
How would you redesign it then?
I would not approach it as a game that also teaches skills. I would approach it from a skill building through a game aspect. And I would attract the people that were not wanting to play a real-time strategy game, thinking, oh, this is just educational StarCraft, and instead approach it from a, doing well in this game is going to lead you into being able to do better in these sorts of fields if that's something you're interested in. Because it can't, just playing a game isn't enough always, because it's, you build the skill you focus on. So if you're focusing on running around and shooting things, the skills that are strengthened are not going to be the ones of planning and management.
So with your tech focus in your master's degree, would you focus on one specific improvement, or would you have various variables that you would measure?
Well, the game itself has different stages to it based on how much you're building up. And all of a sudden now you've figured out how to mine raw ore and refine it into metals, and now you're stamping them into gears. And then suddenly you hit the point where, like, oh, I can extract oil. And now you have to deal with fluids, which can't be transported conveniently on a conveyor belt. You have to deal with fluid pressure and routing the liquids where you want to go. You can't mix the liquids together, and it becomes much more complicated. So each of these milestones is a metric to measure achievement in and of itself, because it requires now learning an entirely new set of rules and things that you have to work with. There are circuitry in the game too, where you can set up circuit networks. And one of the things I had wanted the students to eventually be able to do, which of course we didn't get there, was program the game to play the school's fight song.
Is it because that was just that was a fun goal, or was there any specific application that you aspired for them to achieve?
Well, fun goal, but also, it'd be something that they could show off at a school assembly, that they built a circuit network that could, play the school's fight song. But also, if they could do that and they were really liking it, then perhaps they should be going into something like computer science.
Okay. So with that in mind, how can we look critically at the potential educational benefits of a game?
You're going to need to refine that question a bit. That's very broad.
Okay. You mentioned that there are certain variables that we can base as being educationally significant. So from understanding the value of choices, from mathematics, various STEM concepts that are utilized in game, reflexes. But I think the question that I would like to ask is, when you look at a game, any game, what are the starting points that we can say, okay, this game has the potential to being educationally significant and helpful?
Well, first and foremost, you have to define what's educational, because all skill building is inherently educational. So if you're referring to academically educational,
Let's start with academically. Let's do that.
okay. Well, if you want to decide what benefit a game can give you, you have to understand how the game is played. So, and then you have to break down what is required to be good at this game. So if you're watching someone play Call of Duty, or you're watching, or they're playing Counter-Strike or another PvP game, player versus player, where they are fighting other people, well, that's going to require knowledge of the weapons or items that you can use. It's going to require knowledge of map layout. It's going to require the ability to have fast reflexes and aim immediately and without thinking at the spots that's going to cause the most damage when you fire your weapon. So that sort of game is not necessarily an academic skill building game, but it's going to be, you can use it in life in places where you're going to need to make snap decisions. On the academic side, if we were to say something like Factorio, then I was trying to get my students to draw out flowcharts of how you would get from these raw components to what they're trying to build. And that skill of here's my starting components, what are we trying to make, how do we get there, is actually a skill in chemistry through a process known as retrosynthesis, where you start actually backwards, where you start at the product you want and you work your way backwards through the chemical reactions until you reach the product that, or components that you actually have that you can work with, because there's often many, many ways to get to an answer.
Can any game be a gateway to academic learning then?
Absolutely any game academically, no.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, unless you are unless you're actively creating an educational game where it's like, shoot these guys and then solve this math problem, like the Math Blaster games from when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
So there are games that do not train academic skills, but all games train skills, because anytime you're working at doing something well, even if it's something like 2 dots on your phone where you're just combining the dots together to get points, well, that's pattern recognition.
Mm-hmm.
Pattern recognition is an academic skill. It doesn't look like an academic game, but it is.
That's so funny that you should say that, considering that before I started the Artsy Gamer and started really getting into various games, I think I had 2 mobile games. One was called Dots, which is pattern recognition and figuring out puzzles in order to get to the next level. And the other one had to do with establishing spectrum of color and getting all the colors in the right area, which means that I developed and tuned my eye to understanding the various transitions from one color to another. And we can even...
Would that say that helped you in your comicking?
Well, I'm not a color theory person. I do feel that color is probably my weakest aspect when it comes to comicking, but I do feel that I have an easier transition of understanding what different colors are if we want to go into this argument about whether or not Rosie the cat is purple or blue. Consulcato. Anyway, I knew exactly where you were going with it, by the way. But
I'll let you say it.
I know. She's blue. So anyway, but let's talk about then like Neopets, right? Where if for those who are old enough to remember what Neopets was, it's kind of like Animal Crossing, but not Animal Crossing. And one of the applications that I learned playing the game is HTML and coding when I was 8 or 9 or something, and being able to incorporate that with building my own website for school and understanding the language once I was taking that in various classes. So I would say, and I would agree that any game can be a gateway to learning, but it doesn't often have, some of it may not have academic applications, but I would say that there are ways for it to being beneficial, which is a great transition to which game have you played, past or present, or both, that you learned had professional applications to everyday life?
Well, you asked this question just so I would talk about spreadsheets, I know. I really enjoy games that make me have to optimize. I'm an optimizer probably at heart. So in order to do that, I tend to build spreadsheets in order to run mathematical calculations to decide what's the best choice that I should make. And there are many such games, from Transport Tycoon, where I'm building rail lines to transport commodidies from farm to factory to city, and I'm trying to decide which locomotives I should be putting at the head of my train and how many I need in order to get the deliveries at the fastest I can with costing the least amount of money and upkeep. I have games like Aurora, which is it's mostly a text-based game with a very little bit of visual representation, where in order to design spaceships, you have to actually design the individual components and select all the different properties of the components. And there's a lot of, like, you're designing a missile, so you need to decide how much of the how big is the missile going to be, how much of it's going to be fuel, how much of it's going to be engine, and how powerful is the engine going to be. And there's a whole bunch of different interplays where as you increase one variable, another variable decreases, so you have to find that sweet spot. And in order to do things like this, I built spreadsheets. And up until a few years ago, like, I had basic Microsoft Office skills in terms of I could write a fantastic paper in Word. I could do basic setting up tables and telling the Excel to calculate an average and things like that because I needed it for chemistry and for writing lab reports and whatnot when I was a student. But I learned how to create pivot tables or lookup tables in Excel, which allows me to set a series of information and elsewhere in other calculations, look up that information and automatically plug it in. I learned how to do conditional formatting where the cells would color themselves based on criteria I set, so I could quickly and visually identify in a table of 200 rows which combination was the most optimal, and things like that. That I built that so that I could have fun playing my game. I guess I also had fun building the spreadsheet. But now I can use that when I am analyzing student data and trying to determine what the best fit is for this lab report they've given me. And I have this rubric that has a bunch of rather subjective terms, but when I punch things into my spreadsheet, it can help me see how all those pieces fit together. And once again, seeing how all the pieces fit together is a very important skill to have, regardless of what you're doing in life.
I really do want to have like a screenshot of your spreadsheet to put on because let me tell you, friends, it's super impressive. So
Here, I'll send it to
you. Yeah, you can send it to me and I'll post it on here. But what is a good transition point for this? I mean, is aside from the professional applications, which games have improved your personal life in with the applications, like either relationship building? You mentioned that there were games where it improved your vocabulary. Yeah, let's go with that.
Well, in terms of relationship building, there's the games you and I have played together, and that I would say more that the game was the medium rather than the for us to do things together when we're long distance or when we were in person and I wanted to share a story with you. Much like how we read together and share stories that one of us may know and the other one does not, or something that neither of us has read before. Playing a game is kind of the similar thing. You get to sit there, if you're the one that knows the game, you get to sit there and experience the joy and wonder of someone discovering it for the first time.
Okay, well, that is actually a great transition with describing how games can have relationship applications as a medium, because there are a couple of games that we played when we were long distance. And for those who don't know, HubsMod and I were long distance for 3.5 years. I think the first couple of months of our marriage, we were long distance before I moved to Italy to be with you. And I think the one that really stands out to me right now is Keep Talking and No One Explodes. The bomb deactivation game, which requires one person to follow the directions of another person reading the manual, and you have a certain amount of time to make sure how the to dismantled the thing. And what I found was really interesting, and especially from a conflict resolution perspective, is that communication is so individual. And so the way that I interpret what you say is often not what you said.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
mm-hmm,
That game is brilliant for building communication.
mm-hmm,
And if you want to develop communication with the person, commit to playing this game at least a few times a day. Because the person playing the game, controlling the bomb defusal, doesn't know what to do, what wires to cut, what symbols to press, what numbers or what symbols to press on the keypad. And there's a whole bunch of different mini games effectively. And the other person has the manual. And so the person defusing the bomb has to communicate what's on the bomb. So the person reading the manual can find the right information to defuse that section of the bomb. But when you go to communicate back what they need to do, a lot of times you have to come up with your own words to describe what you see in the manual. Because it's not enter this word or press these letters on this keypad, it's symbols. And the symbols aren't necessarily something you can easily describe. So you have to come up with a new set of words and language to quickly convey the information that you need to convey because you're on a timer.
yeah, I found it really fun learning that in relationships, especially when you are rather young, is we often consider the way that we speak and the way that we interpret information as like what everyone else is experiencing. And I had this moment of realization when we were playing this game, especially long distance, is that, wow, this is a completely separate person from me who has completely separate experiences, who has a completely different language of interpreting information, despite the fact that we speak English as a native language. And why am I getting frustrated at the person when really what we don't have is an established language? So what other games have we played that have had relationship building and communication building skills?
The and us.
Is the and us considered
It's a
a
game.
yeah, it's a game. So
It's a game.
for those who don't know what the Indus is, the Indus is effectively an electronic card game where you ask your partner or a friend very personal questions about their lives.
This game would be partners. It's
Is it
not
partners?
friends.
Really?
It's a partners
It's a
game.
partners game?
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's about intimate relationships.
Yeah, and so in the first couple of years, I think HubsMod and I would like reconnect by playing this game and asking questions. And I mean, it rips your heart out. It requires emotional honesty, and I think that's something that I've always strived for with games because of you, sir, is this notion that is it emotionally honest? Does it have that relationship that seems to be a realistic experience? And yeah, go ahead.
I was just say that that's a game that develops the skill of providing emotional safe space and practice being honest with your partner, because it gets you to ask of the other very hard questions, and sometimes they don't apply.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's something that hasn't happened in your relationship or is a non-issue in the relationship. But every now and then it hits it right on the nose, and it leads to very deep, very personal, sometimes very difficult conversations.
And I think those are the games that I think I really would love to see and probably find more of, is this notion that, from an educational standpoint from you, from an academic standpoint versus a conflict resolution standpoint, when we look at games when it comes to relationship building, how applicable is it to actually improving communication skills? So I honestly feel that with games coming out within the last couple of years, like sure, shooter games and competitive games are always going to have a niche and going to be popular for whatever reason. But I do feel that gaming now is really understanding that people have very intrinsic, very primal needs to connect with people. And the fact that, we're living in a pandemic, and more often than not, we are connecting with people online. So would you say that that is a great starting point to expressing the necessity for video games in such a technologically immersed society?
I know that playing games online with other people can lead to jobs. I know someone who put the fact that they managed a World of Warcraft guild and scheduled raids as part of their job skills and got a position managing others because of it.
What? That's awesome. That's so cool.
So social skills can develop through online games, and especially pertinent in a pandemic. So the idea that we're isolated because we're here alone in our houses isn't necessarily true. While I think psychologically speaking, in-person relationships are probably better if you had the choice of only online or only in person. Only in person is going to be more beneficial. That's not to say there is no benefit to having an online relationship or online relationships and friendships being a waste of time or meaningless or anything along those lines.
I mean, if that was the case, we wouldn't be together, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah. And our closest.
But I would much rather be with you than long distance.
I know. But like we can also say that perhaps even though the game itself may not have academic benefit, right? That the notion that it is a medium, as you've been saying, as a way for connecting with people, as reestablishing our humanity, and a way for us to, yes, there's a form of escapism, but there's also this form of really, I wish I knew brain stuff, I don't, but like this notion that it sparks certain creativity aspects to your brain. Like, people may think that Animal Crossing is a quote unquote waste of time, but I've learned how to do pixel art. I've met so many awesome people, made friends. I've learned how to monetize a YouTube channel. And it has so many educational applications because we are becoming so technologically immersed, which kind of like leads us into our final conversation before we move into the Q&A is, we're becoming parents in like 7 weeks. Yeah, I know. I'm super excited. I'm also super terrified. And
Parasited.
Terracited, yes. And I know that we have family friends who are either gamers themselves or they are tech phobic. Or they feel that certain types of tech, aka screen time, is very harmful to children specifically. And so I lay awake at night thinking about this, friends. This notion that, how are we to establish boundaries as parents? Because kids really do see what we're doing. It's like, don't ever say like, do as I say, not as I do, because that's never going to work. But what boundaries do you think as early parents, from without having the experience ourselves, what should we consider with a little one growing up in such a technologically immersed culture from an education standpoint, if you feel comfortable talking about it?
Sure. I don't like black and white thinking. It's super easy and it's what humans want. They want this is good, this is bad, do this, not that, and it doesn't require nuance. But there is nuance in everything. And if you're ignoring the nuance, if you're just hand waving it away, then you're going to run into problems. Some big, some small. In terms of tech time, why?
Your
I think the
alarm is
question
going
is
off. Hold on. Keep talking.
Oops. I think there's a balance, and there's two questions that need to be asked. Why are we allowing screen time at this moment? And what are they doing with said technology? So if it's like of our parents' age, the fear was like using the TV as the babysitter, where you just sit them down in front of the TV and you go off and do your thing, and the kid just stares at the television for hours on hours and hours on end. Now that's much more passive than playing a game. So there's not that there's no value in watching something on a screen. Movies and other entertainment and TV shows are incredible things, but playing a game is definitely more mentally stimulating and engaging. So if it's you said a little bit of escapism is a good thing. It builds creativity. Too much escapism is a bad thing. you can't function in the world if you're not willing to live in it. So as a parent, I think it's not oh, you've had your hour of screen time, now you can't go back on the screen. It's, well, what are you doing with it? As a young child, their level of interaction with the screen is not that high. They really can only mostly just watch. So I'd say less screen time, probably better, because it lets them develop the skills they need to develop as a child and young adult. But as they get older and are able to interact more, they can start doing things that are of benefit to them, whether it's creatively beneficial, whether it's academically beneficial, whether it's something that they can build and feel proud of, like Minecraft. Like, absolutely, if our kid wants to play Minecraft and build a redstone circuit, or build a castle, or
Set villagers on
rope all the
fire.
well, if that's what our godparents want to teach our kids, then
Oh my God. No, well, it's mostly the our friend's daughter who is like, "Do you want to see what I'm doing in Minecraft? I'm setting people on fire," and I'm like, "This is why I like you. You're so cute." But okay, and I don't know if this is like a relationship talk that no one should have any sort of information on. I think what really worries me is that not only are kids becoming technologically immersed, and it's like technology as a form of literacy is important once you are in grade school. So for me, when it comes to being two parents who, one, use gaming as a form of recreation and hobby, and also a form as like winding down, I think one of the biggest concerns that I've had is how do we establish this link of connection with a growing child who is developing millions of neurons a second, and still have this ability of like retaining a level of sanity during the next couple of years. And so I know that there's a lot of studies that come from the effects of tech time on a child's brain, but how can society really start looking at the way technology is affecting the family unit?
I can't solve society's problem with one answer,
I
unfortunately.
know.
Everything always, at least it seems to me, boils down to education. It's you're asking about changing opinion, and you change opinion by showing the benefit of another way. And you're going to have people who are emotionally invested in said opinions, and they are not going to change because you can't logic somebody out of a position they haven't logicked themselves into.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, and maybe it's just like that's something that I've also realized from the value of gaming, is that often when we have an answer, it's not just like, this is the answer for the rest of time. It's going to be a growing and continuous question that we ask that's going to have a different answer whenever we ask it. And I think what I'm looking forward to like showing our kid how to play Animal Crossing. And I think you've talked about how you really enjoyed your earliest memories of watching your dad play Civilization, right? That was the game. So I think ultimately, so as long as we share that aspect of ourselves, I think we're going to be okay.
I think we're going to do just fine.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I say that now. They can ask us in like 6 months.
Yep. When they we're not going to remember this first year, I don't think. We're going to look back on this podcast going, we did this podcast? Wow. Well, that's kind of like all the questions that we have when it comes to the unintended educational benefits of gaming. Is there anything more that you would like to add or feel that we could cover for the last couple of minutes before we move to the Q&A?
If something comes up during the Q&A, we can go on a tangent and go back to the Q&A.
Ooh, I like the tangent. Okay.
Because there's always little tangents that pop up while we're having a conversation, and then the window of opportunity passes and I forget the tangent. So I
appreciate that I'm not the only one in this relationship that does that, because I say this lovingly. You lovingly tease me about my cyclical explanations of things. And so I like the fact that I'm not the only one that goes on tangents and rambles.
Oh, I ramble all the time in front of my students, and I lose track of what they ask me. So I have to circle back and ask them if that answered the question.
Yep. That's a family trait, friends. That's definitely going to be traveling down the line, I'm sure. Okay, well, let's go to the Q&A then. We've broken it down to gaming questions, recreation questions, education questions, and one random question, and this person knows who they are. But we're going to start with, what was the first game that we played together?
Well, there are 3 games that I think of at the early point of our relationship, and I don't remember the order of them.
Same.
Guild Wars 2 was the first, was something that I got you into because it was something that would be a constant thing. We played a whole bunch of Guild Wars 2 together. We played a little bit of Minecraft, but at the time it was very empty, and you were living in Malta, and the emptiness kind of got to you.
Trauma, friends. Trauma. Yes.
So we played a little bit of Minecraft, but not very much. And then in the 3 months that you were living with me in Italy, while you were on a visiting visa, we played through Final Fantasy X, and I got to experience the endgame tears alongside you again.
Oh, nice. Man. Yeah, I think that was the beginning of the end, was Final Fantasy X, truly.
I was realizing that was a beautiful story, not just a game.
Yeah, I mean, we made fun of like the boob mechanics of like, what was it, Lulu?
Lulu, yeah.
Yes, the boob mechanics. And did I experience the cactuar in that game for the first time?
Yes, that was your first experience of cactuar.
Drive me nuts. Hate the cactuar. But I will say that Guild Wars 2 does have a special place in my heart, because we also started using that as a way to hang out with another bestie for Rusty, right? And we then moved on to having like 3-way conversations on a regular basis and going on raids. And I think that started healing a huge portion of my anti-gaming mentality, which, yes, friends, I did have one. So
it's very true.
It was. Gosh, we can go on this tangent, sure. So, friends, the reason why I still laugh at the fact that I have a gaming channel and that I play and I do live streams is, one, I felt games were incredibly toxic. And I think I remember the first time HubsMod was visiting for a long distance thing, and I had actually broken up with a previous partner because of the fact that they used gaming as a form of escapism and, you know, failed 3 semesters of college and weren't really applying themselves. And I wasn't important in the relationship anyway. But I think what I started realizing, that gaming in of itself wasn't the problem, it was the person, was I was doing some chore. I think I was washing dishes.
Cooking.
I was cooking.
Yes.
And you were upstairs playing a game. And I remember feeling like I was like reliving the whole experience. And then I go upstairs and I'm really upset and I'm worried that I'm going to be turned down. And HubsMod profusely apologized, turned off his game. Or did you bring it downstairs? I don't remember.
No, I shut the game off and I came down to help you.
And that was, I think, the healing moment of like, oh, gaming is actually not the problem. My problem was my choice in partners. So that was kind of the beginning of the end, really. And yeah, that was a fun time. Yeah.
In hindsight,
that's a fun time. Well, you look at the hardship in the from the forward looking back and realizing that how important and crucial that was relationship wise. So anyway, the next question is, Artsy, besides Animal Crossing New Horizons, is there any other game that you enjoy playing? Well, it's been a hot minute. I do have aspirations to starting a Artsy Ruins Stardew Valley series starting next week for reasons. And I'm trying to remember, it's been a hot minute since I've played any other game besides Animal Crossing. RimWorld is something that we've also played together. And RimWorld is kind of like Animal Crossing, but violent. And
Animal Crossing meets Firefly.
Animal Crossing meets Apocalypse meets Firefly. And I do enjoy The Sims 4, but I only play it randomly. And I was really big into BioWare games for a while, but I haven't picked that up since Andromeda didn't really impress me with the BioWare Mass Effect series. So far it's just Animal Crossing, but I do want to get back into Stardew Valley. And then they ask, what is HubsMod's favorite game?
Well, I have a tendency to play a game really, 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 really hard and then drop it for a year or two, and then before coming back to it. So I kind of cycle through games because I tend to fixate on them.
Hyperfixation.
And
Yep.
I definitely hyperfixate. So right now, I've been playing a whole bunch of BattleTech, which is a computer adaptation of a tabletop board game, kind of like Warhammer, where you have giant fighting mechs on a battlefield and you go and you shoot and beat the shit out of each other. It's the game idea is the game has always been called BattleTech, but if you've ever heard of the Mech Warrior series, it takes the rules and makes you a pilot in one of them, and it's a first person sort of thing. Probably the games I've put the most hours into overall would be the Total War series of games, specifically Total War Warhammer. I've played a massive amount of RimWorld and Stellaris. And as a franchise, perhaps the Civilization series. I have played every Civilization game that has ever come out except Civilization 6. I have never played Civilization 6, but I've even played the off-brand ones like Civilization Test of Time. There were a whole bunch. When Civilization 2 was the most prominent one, there was kind of like what you consider an expansion pack, but they were scenario discs for Civilization 2, where it's like you could now play as dinosaurs in the
Angels and Demons.
era.
We played that too.
The Fall from Heaven 2 mod, which turns it into a magic game instead of a historical simulation game. Crusader Kings is something we've played together a whole bunch of.
If you want to talk about relationship building and intrigue, I would recommend Crusader Kings. Is it Crusader Kings 2 or Crusader Kings?
Well, 3 now.
Jeebus. Yeah, Crusader Kings 2. The choices that we made.
It's the political, it's the family dynasty. You can start as big or small as you want in medieval Europe, or even India, for that matter, North Africa, and go until the end of time, or all your family members die out.
Yeah, that is another game that I did enjoy playing. I don't know how I feel about Crusader Kings 3 because the mechanics were so different and I was so used to the two gameplay. But I will say that similar to RimWorld, where you just watch people do really dumb things and you're like, you're picking and choosing various bloodlines in order to increase your breeding stock, and you feel kind of gross in the beginning, but then you get over it, and then you're just like, we're going to marry this person off, we're going to kill that person, we're going to make sure that this brother does not get any land, and I'm just like, wow, this is sociopathic, and I love it.
You marry your daughter off to somebody that's low in the list of succession, and then after they have a kid, you just slowly murder everyone above her in line until she's the one that inherits. And then when she dies, your kid gets the throne.
Yep. So this leads to the next question of what is your and HubsMod's favorite genre or type of games to play, which is either together or apart, which I think you can kind of see that I'm more design oriented, more relationship oriented. And what would you say is
political intrigue for you as well?
Oh, political intrigue. Yes. And you're more like strategic oriented. I don't think you're as visually focused with your games because, as you said, Aurora is a text-based game, right?
I like visuals. I generally, it's one of the last things I look for because there was a time in the 90s, late 90s, when graphics really started, computers started becoming powerful enough to have good graphics is that all the focus of the game design was on look how pretty the game is, but then there was no substance. So, and it really didn't keep my interest. So I, for the longest time, was really turned off by a game based on how good it looked. If it looked good, I figured it was a crap game. And that has changed. The pendulum started to swing back the other way as games have started to focus on gameplay again and not just the pretty visuals. Yeah, so yeah, I'd say definitely you judge a book by its cover in this case.
I know, I do. But I will say it is your fault that I love Stardew Valley. That Stardew Valley was the Animal Crossing New Horizons for me before Animal Crossing became even part of my life. And I was like, I don't know how I feel pixelated. And you're like, just give it a try. It looks good. And then you know what? I romanced all of the NPCs that I could. And I think I have hundreds of hours into Stardew Valley with various game saves. So it's like each and then there was like oh gosh, it just came out last year. It was like Concord, it like the guardian of the you know the
Garden
game.
Story?
Yeah, Garden Story. Thank you. He knows the game that I play and I don't remember. Yes, but Garden Story, which is very cutesy and very pixelated oriented. And so I think because of your introduction and saying that graphics are not as important, I have started really appreciating the low resolution pixel games. Although it was quite heartbreaking for you when you were like, you introduced me to Guild Wars 2 and you tried to get me to play Guild Wars 1 and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Guild Wars 1 was such a better game.
Yeah, and then there was you had introduced me to Mass Effect, and then I played through Mass Effect, and then I had to go back to playing Dragon Age Origins, and I'm just going, what is this nonsense? What happened to the graphics? But it was also a different form of gameplay with Guild Wars, not Guild Wars, well, Dragon Age Origins, because it's a different gameplay entirely. And so I have tried really hard to not judge books by their cover, but pretty graphics. Although I will say that Animal Crossing New Horizons has gotten me into wanting to play the original games, which has not as good graphics. So perhaps that's what has helped you. Now, here is a really interesting question. What is your favorite and worst purchase so far with a game?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a worst game purchase, probably because I may have played it for a little bit and decided it's not for me and stopped playing it. I think, to be honest, I think I've played less than half the games in my Steam list.
That's more than me.
To be perfectly honest with you. I would have to say my best purchase was Mass Effect. I did not know going into that game just how hooked I would get on the story. I was newly single out of my previous relationship, and I was needing something to occupy my time as I kind of, went through the process of healing. And I got this game because it was recommended to me by a friend, and I knew nothing of it. I really wasn't much of a shooter player, but I figured I'd give it a try. And I played through the first game, and I was just, wow. And then I played through the second game, and I was hooked. And it was just I finished the second game just a few months before the third one released. And I think I bought the third one on the day of release. I think it's the first time I'd ever bought a game on release day, and I just binged it. And I was so invested. So I'd definitely say Mass Effect is probably my favorite purchase. It definitely is probably my favorite story of all time. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite game of all time because I like so many.
Oh, I also I can't really think of what my worst purchase is so far, but I will say that Animal Crossing New Horizons got me into console games, and I know that you rightfully so complain that there's not as much power that the Switch should have with the as being a powerful console game, console piece of equipment. It should have better storage and all of that stuff. But Animal Crossing was kind of the gateway for consoles, and so I have been looking specifically for console games to play, and that's what led to Garden Story. That's what led to I think One Lonely Outpost, when it finally releases, I want to play. And I think you gifted me Stardew Valley, right? Yeah. I mean, as far as purchases are concerned, I think Animal Crossing and a couple of others are the only games that I was actually, like, I purchased myself. HubsMod has been very loving to gift me. Yes, like, here, play
I tend
games.
to push games on her, yeah.
Yes. Just like,
try this.
Try this. But, the worst purchase. Oh, that's hard. That's hard. Well, I wouldn't say it's a worst purchase, but I am too scared to play this game by myself. And no one as of yet wants to play it with me. And I want to reach out to a couple of streamer friends and see whether or not they want to be scared. But I want to play Phasmophobia. And so far, I've purchased the thing. And I tell this story in the sense that I had... I started playing the game. I was on a group call with HubsMod and two of our besties. And I couldn't figure out how to unlock the door into the first house.
The front door.
Yeah, the front house. And so it took me 15 minutes to realize, like, oh, I needed the keys because they wanted to keep the ghost contained, I guess. And by the time I walk in, I was so terrified. I'd hyped myself up. I was like, the interior design is awful. I can't do this. So up until, like, I want to play Phasmophobia really badly, but the fact is I've hyped myself up. It's currently unplayable, and I'm really upset about it. Anyway. So, the next question is, do you like to 100% complete games, or are you okay with just finishing the story?
I'm a completionist.
I'm not.
It's bad. But the problem is, I get frustrated if it's like Dragon Age Inquisition. We have all these different collections to complete, and I just get so frustrated. I'm like, forget it. I'm just finishing the storyline.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to be a completionist. So in the BattleTech game, I decided, hey, there's this achievement for getting like 99% of all the points you can get. And I'm like, that's going to be a 40-hour commitment before I even notice if I'm on the right track because it's timed. And it's like, I'm going to give this a shot. And I got halfway through and I'm like, okay, I need to take a break now because I'm feeling kind of burned out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the sort of person that I will play a game past the point where it's fun because I'm trying to complete it.
I think the only thing that I truly completed, like honestly completed, was the museum in Animal Crossing. I think that's the only thing that I've ever really worked through. It's like, if the story was cohesive enough and I did enough, it's fine. But I recall when I finished Mass Effect 1, because I kind of just streamlined it, you're like, Artsy, you kind of missed like a lot of stuff. And I'm going, I mean, I finished the game, though. I made a really terrible choice at the ending. So
you're not going to like the sequels because you didn't get the stuff in the first one.
Well, look, the romancing options were so much better in Mass Effect than they were in Dragon Age Origins. That was the other thing that really bothered me, is the fact that my saves apparently didn't transfer really well with the Dragon Age versus the ones with Mass Effect. And for some reason, all of my romances, with the exception of Dragon Age Inquisition, were awful. But Care Bear is Care Bear for life in Mass Effect, so.
You've had some really angry romances in BioWare games.
Oh my gosh, like, I don't even know what I did. It's like, at least, okay, we're gonna go on a tangent for a minute. We're gonna complain about Caden from Mass Effect. Oh yes, so I'm sorry if this ruins anything. I hate Caden from Mass Effect. It's like, I understand that he has these terrible headaches and he has some really like sad boy energy, but the fact is he did not want to cuddle 5 minutes before the end game and the first thing, and then he accuses me of cheating after he walks out, and I'm like, oh no, Gare Bear has been my bestie for Rusty from the beginning, has not left me, does not care about, like, you know, things that have occurred in, you know, the second game and in the third game, and you think I'm gonna go back to you? Are you serious? Anyway, that's just, I get so mad. And then I don't know what I did with the Dragon Age romancing, because
Yeah, because Alistair, you were romancing Alistair, and there's a way that you can continue to romance Alistair on the side and still have him ascend to the throne. But I think you missed like the one conversation option you needed, and you didn't have the save to go back and fix that, and so he dumped you, and you were so mad.
yeah, and then
I thought you were going to stop playing the game after that.
I was tempted, and then I think the second Dragon Age game, I missed an entire, like, freaking NPC to add to your... Yeah, I missed
the party member, Isabella.
And I was like, I think Isabella was probably the one that I would have romanced, because she's
pirate?
so... Yeah, she's a badass pirate, babe. I mean, duh.
You can have a fling with her in the first game, too.
I remember that. I think I did.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did. But no, it was just, it's so frustrating. Anyway. So
this is it. Artsy's dislike of Caden is so strong. She has it out for the voice actor. She cannot stand any character who is voiced by him.
I feel so bad. Yeah, you tried to get me into what was it, Star Wars
Knights of the Old Republic.
Knights of the Old Republic, and I heard
Just
the
such
voice.
an amazing game.
I know it's an amazing game, but then I hear his voice is like, oh, he needs to die. Like, that's just, and I feel so bad.
He voices Karth, who's kind of your number two person from the start of the game, and she's like, I can't stand him. He's like, he hasn't done anything. He's like, it's Caden.
Caden, but as a freaking, yeah, no, and I feel really bad. So if the voice actor for this person ever hears this, it is nothing personal. It's just, I hate your characters. Okay. That's it. It has nothing to do with you. It's absolutely how Caden was written in Mass Effect, and it needs to be better. Anyway. So moving on from the tangent of Artsy getting upset over, you know, romancing things. Are there any games popular in Korea that either of you would recommend trying out? We don't really play Korean games though, really.
Koreans are really big into esports, so League of Legends and StarCraft are definitely the big two, but there are actually a whole bunch of, apparently, Korean game development has kind of taken off, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just Korean only that I have no knowledge of.
Because we are bad and we didn't learn Korean.
There is, though, a traditional Korean game called Ute, and it is a game that is the closest way I could describe it to someone who is American is Sorry, the game. In terms of how pieces move around, but instead of like rolling dice or anything, you throw sticks. You cast, and they have writing on one side, and one side is shaved down flat, and the other side is round, and how they fall on top of each other and which side is up determines what pieces you can move where. But it's the game that's traditionally played over Lunar New Year. So this is actually the time to be talking about it.
Oh yeah, and I think there's also like a little bit of money, so like kids can earn a few like 100 won or something from their grandparents or something. And then there's like this other game, I don't remember what it is, and it's like it's similar to Jax, you know, like with the little spiky balls with the bouncy ball. It's like it's these die, and then you try to pick a certain amount of up within a certain time frame. I don't remember the name. Yeah, we played that over Chuseok when we were visiting one of your colleagues and his now wife, and so she was really good at it because, I mean,
vague recollections maybe.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember now.
Yeah, we have one of those, but we haven't touched it since then. So to answer your question, we do not really play Korean games, which is unfortunate because one, we don't know Korean, and two, we're kind of in this expat bubble where we don't really participate in Korean interactions, but also because of how Korea society is formed, Koreans don't really go outside that, as far as I know. It's pretty homogenous. Yeah, I don't know. So the next question is, are there any games that you feel are educational or somehow promote learning?
I think that's been the topic of
Yeah.
conversation up to this point. Other games, though, that I might specifically, I haven't necessarily talked about yet. If one pops in my mind, I'll come back to it.
I would say that I didn't understand how creative Minecraft was, because I think any game that really encourages modding, it inspires and instills in people to learn how to mod a game and make it so it doesn't break the game. So I'm not a Minecraft player, but I have people I know and respect who play Minecraft and enjoy it. And this notion that you look at a game and it provides an opportunity for you to do something, but you don't know how to do it, so you figure out how to incorporate it. And I think that's pretty inspirational. But I don't know. I I always complain about how Animal Crossing New Horizons really does instill really bad enabling behavior when it comes to conflict avoidance. And if a young person is learning about life and thinks that that's how you deal with situations in real life, I think that has negative implications. But I can't really think of anything aside from what we were talking about earlier. This one is a long one. Is there any correlative value in the distinction between couples who play video games together and those who choose to do so separately? We'll start with that one, and then we'll go to the second part of that question.
I mean, if you're playing games separately, but it's still something that you talk about, then I would say that it's a together thing. It's a way that you can share in interests, much like if you have two separate hobbies, but you enjoy hearing about the person's hobby that you don't have any interest in partaking in. Playing something together, it would be, I guess, in my opinion, similar to doing any activity together. It's together time.
Yeah, our office, it's like I'm here and HubsMod is over there. So oftentimes what will happen is one of us wants to connect with the other person. And so like, hey, what are you doing? How are things going? How's your game? So I think that there is a value in acknowledging that games can be individual, but also a collective experience. And that couples who really enjoy doing games together can also find value of doing it by themselves and then sharing. And then the second part of this question is, have you seen any marked instances in your own relationship where you've grown closer by playing video games together?
Video games is how we connected and did things while we were long distance. So absolutely. And I can say that, we've been together for
nearly
a
10
hell of a long
years.
time now, nearly 10 years at this point. And I'm still constantly on the lookout for games that we can play together, new things that we can do, because honestly, I absolutely love playing games with you. I feel it does bring us closer.
I think the most recent one that we played was Valheim and Smash Brothers. Those were the two different. Yep.
And Streets of Rogue on the TV.
Oh yeah, Streets of Rogue is a really fun game to play as a couple, because especially when HubSpot and I have very distinct gameplay techniques and strategies. I know that I consider him just a better player overall, but the notions of like what I gravitate towards as a form of gameplay, which sometimes is just button mashing, to be honest, I do think that playing games with HubsMod has taught me to look at games critically and how to figure out what it is that I can do to be a better game player. But that does require me to actually like stop and, research things and perhaps use spreadsheets and things.
Well, recently we've been doing Super Metroid together. I've been watching you play that.
Yeah, haven't played that in a while. I think that's the sort of game that you really have to just like play regularly, because I don't remember what I was doing the last time. That,
and if you stop playing, you lose the skill building of your reflexes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember and talking with Koi about accessibility, and what I realized is very crucial is I have muscle memory and with consoles, like a specific sort of muscle memory, and we had to change the actual like gameplay mechanics, like the buttons and what they did so that I could even play the game. So it was really fun to have HubsMod show me from a technical perspective that there are certain things that can be modded so that you can make the game more playable. Because at one point I was trying to shoot and I was jumping, or I was jumping and I was trying to shoot and I kept dying, and I was like, no wonder people think this game is so hard. You can't even determine what you're shooting or jumping on. But I did have a lot of fun with Super Metroid, because I think your suggestion was that I should get into the Metroid series before buying Metroid Dread and giving that a try. Yeah. So I think this is a question for me, unless you want to answer this question. What is your favorite thing to do in Animal Crossing New Horizons? I'm going to not answer this question, then I will answer this question. So I have lately been missing the nostalgia of like just playing the game, going fishing, seeing my villagers, and just kind of enjoying the island as it is. But I do find that I enjoy designing islands a lot. The only problem is I want to figure out a balance of designing and also interacting and doing what I think Nintendo's original intention for Animal Crossing New Horizons was. But you've done some stuff in Animal Crossing. What is your favorite thing besides getting my villagers mad at me?
Oh, I enjoy it when you're like, here, I'm cooking, go do this task for me in Animal Crossing. I sit down and I grumble about the game and some of the design that doesn't make me happy.
Ah, yes, yes. It allows him to invoke his inner curmudgeon. I think that's his favorite part of the game. What was your favorite thing to do that like you didn't expect to enjoy with Animal Crossing?
Honestly, I can see how it can be relaxing and mindless, and you can do something without really needing to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be nice when you spent all day making decisions as a teacher at
Mm-hmm.
school. I know sometimes I come home and I'm like, all these games I like playing, I don't have the energy to play them because I have to make more decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some aspect of it where all you have to do is like, oh, I can gift my villagers for the day, or I can go work on the museum stuff, or I can hang out with some NPCs and just enjoy it. But yeah, I think I want to go back to that because that's something that I really miss with the gameplay. Because I remember getting up at 6 in the morning and making coffee, like while coffee was brewing and you were still sleeping. There was like this beautiful moment for like half an hour to an hour to 2 hours that I was just like fully engaged and immersed in this growing village that I helped create, and it was really awesome. And this, I think, is a question for me, unless you have a specific furniture set that you like in Animal Crossing. I personally like the glowing moss DIYs and the vine DIYs, but I'm trying to think. I may be really basic, and I like the ironwood kitchen sets, but really there's just so many furniture items now with the 2.0 update. It's really hard. So I'll get back to that question when I think of it. The next question is, have you ever disagreed over an Animal Crossing villager? Besides the whole, no, you and we agreed that Rosie was blue. Like that is not like a relationship deal breaker. We are team blue over in this household.
You asked me her color before I even knew what the drama was, so that's not even a HubsMod
Yeah.
agrees with Artsy because
Yeah, right.
Artsy is waifu.
It was unbiased. It was an unbiased question. So
But I tried to troll you with Boris, but you ended up falling in love with him. So
yeah, so okay, let's talk about this question. So HubsMod and I have been in various Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and one of them that we don't play anymore featured HubsMod's character named Boris, who is this old as dirt druid who is lewd and gross. And if you do the voice, I swear Do not.
Well, you don't want your podcast listeners to hear the voice. It's okay. I don't have to do it.
You can. Okay. 5 seconds. 5 seconds.
I wasn't prepared. Hold on. Hello there, little Artsy. Thank you for letting me on your podcast. I know I can't see you.
Okay. I hate that voice so much. And he would do it in game. And so when I was gaining momentum with the channel, I was like, you know what? What the heck? Let's have HubsMod pick a villager. And the moment I saw Boris, I was like, oh, no. But yes, joke is on you. I do love Boris. I would actually bring him back to an island. I think a pig boy is amazing. What? Yeah, we don't really have like a disagreement over Animal Crossing villagers. I think that you either said
there's some of them that I didn't really find aesthetically appealing, but it doesn't mean that I hate them.
Yeah.
Or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I think the one villager that became endearing that I did not expect was Sylvana, because that is the one villager that you had pointed out and you're like, oh, who's that? They're cute. And so I felt really bad getting rid of Sylvana. I may have to get her amiibo.
You're like, now I can't get rid of her ever because HubsMod thinks she's cute.
Well, because she reminds me of you now. Like her and Boris. How dare you? Be amazing. So that's all the gaming questions. With recreation, right. What do you normally watch on TV, if you do watch TV together or by yourselves? We don't watch TV by ourselves, really.
No, we watch together.
Mm-hmm.
Sci-fi and fantasy is generally what we watch, so we'll binge shows.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we're on Voyager, Star Trek Voyager. We binged a whole bunch of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, did about like half of Voyager, then took a break because we were kind of Star Trekked out.
Mm-hmm.
We've watched Foundation series because one of our friends has Apple TV.
Oh, such a good series. And we've watched Wheel of Time.
Which I enjoyed, but I know a lot of people who hold the books near and dear to their heart are really upset with the changes.
I've never read it, so I like how it is. There's gay representation, so...
What else have we watched recently? We watched most of The Expanse. We didn't watch the last season. I was kind of expansed out. My hot take on that is I couldn't stand the fact that they advanced the story by killing characters. And yeah. I couldn't get invested in anyone because they kept killing them off.
Yeah. We watched the League of Legends. Is it Arcane?
Arcane. Yeah.
That's a good show. That's that, like, I don't even know anything about League of Legends lore, but if you are looking for a cartoon that holds no punches,
pulls.
I always get the idioms wrong. Anyway, that pulls no punches, then I highly recommend it, even if you're not a League of Legends player. And
yeah, neither of us have ever played any League of Legends, know anything about it, and I kind of went into it with my nose a little bit upturned because League of Legends players can be super toxic, and so I'm kind of biased against people on just out of the I prejudge them. I am prejudiced against them. But by episode 3, I was hooked. The story writing is so good.
I did not know how it was going to go. I think that's my favorite thing about Arcane is it started in one way, and I was like, oh, okay, so they're building the story. It's going to be about a ragtag bunch of kids.
Nope. No, it's not.
Nope. So that's kind of like what we've been working on. I think a good portion of our shows are kind of on hold. Oh, The Witcher. The Witcher is also very good. Are kind of on hold because we binged them all, and now we have to wait for the next season. But what are both of our favorite movies and favorite shows?
So, I have to say probably the best show I have ever seen was The Good Place.
I agree.
Like, oh man.
I agree.
Did I ugly cry at the end of The Good Place.
The
And it
good
was such a beautiful ending.
The Good Place, I think, is one of those shows that had perfect pacing, perfect character development, one of the best endings that I have ever seen. And I still think about it. I think we should re-binge it,
We
honestly.
probably should if we have nothing else to watch.
Yeah, because Kristen Bell and the way that she curses and when she's in the Good Place, I'm like, since I'm not an aggressive driver, friends, but the way that Koreans drive in Korea is definitely not what's the word that I'm looking for that's diplomatic. It is not the same way that I drive, and I get very frustrated. And so I am pretty vocally loud in the car. And I can't do that when I have a little one because I don't want their first word to be something that they learned in the car. So, but yes, The Good Place is really good, and definitely should binge that. I would like to get you into Futurama. That's probably one of. Oh, that's the other thing. We liked Disenchantment. That's
Disenchantment was good.
yeah. That's
Babylon
probably.
5.
Ooh, Babylon 5. Yeah,
You actually haven't finished the series.
I have not. Babylon 5 is, I think, was the gateway show to sci-fi because of you. Again, there's a lot of things about the Artsy Gamer personality that has been directly grown and has thrived because of the influence of our relationship. I think is that I didn't think that I would like sci-fi or D&D because I had my nose upturned or gaming, and then here is this delightful nerd who is handsome as all hell who's like, hey, do you want to create a D&D character and spend like 5 hours on a Saturday with my friends? And I'm like, okay. And then how many campaigns have we been in now?
A bunch.
Yeah, right. Um, so I love Futurama. I wish that I don't feel like I really understand the Simpsons hype, but I do think that Groening's development as a cartoon creator and as a writer and producer for Disenchantment and Futurama are inspired. And I love Steven Universe. So really any cartoons that have sort of any storyline that is that goes against the status quo, I'm a fan of. And oh, we need to talk about Encanto. I will say that as a Disney movie, it is one of the best that I've seen. I hated the ending because in the same line that we always get so mad with Star Trek. Not because Star Trek isn't a great universe and that they don't have great storylines. Like I love Star Trek, but there's always something like so significant that occurs in every
Traumatic.
and traumatic, and then nothing changes. It's so episodic, and I was so upset. And like that's how I actually base movies and shows now, is whether or not the consequences of what had preceded before goes like continues onward. And Encanto unfortunately failed with that. So
Everything up to the last 5 minutes was amazing.
yeah, right.
The music was great. The
Oh,
imagery was so
beautiful.
good.
Yeah, and like they definitely utilized social science and behavioral therapy when it comes to toxic relationships within family dynamics, when it comes to perfectionism and everything. Like it was perfect until it wasn't, and I was so mad. Anyway. So the next one is, what are the best countries to live in currently?
Well, I haven't lived in all countries, so
Yeah, the question was really interesting to me because I think that's such a personal decision. Because I think what you need to do is similar to looking at the educational possibilities of a game, you have to have the variables that define what that means. So when it comes to the best countries, in my opinion, when it comes to variables, are the education system, healthcare, support of any sort of like disabilities, transportation, and food quality. What would you say are other ones?
I would I would definitely agree with you on that. Like Korea has probably the best medical system in the world,
I think it
objectively
does.
speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our local airport is rated the best passenger airport in the world.
I also agree with that. It is so streamlined.
But I would not say our food quality is particularly good here.
It's
at all.
like we have one cabbage, no, two cabbages available.
But in terms of the quality of the food,
Yeah.
not necessarily the variety, but like
And
you
so
buy something and it goes
expensive.
bad 2 days later.
So expensive. Yeah, I think half of our onions that I purchased were already bad, and I can't check that, unfortunately. And also their plastic and recycling capabilities are not as good as it should be. But transportation in general in Korea is top notch. It's one of the best I've seen.
Except for the traffic jams inside of Seoul.
Yes, yes. Been there.
But the buses arrive on time, unlike Italy, where 40 minutes late is considered on time.
Yeah, or they don't show up at all, which is what happened in Malta.
Like in Malta.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. They cancel bus routes and don't tell anyone.
So,
But then food quality in Italy was the best I've ever had.
I agree. If we could have like the transportation, the healthcare system of Korea, with the community aspect and the food of Italy, also the bureaucracy of Korea is so much better because Italians like to will turn you away if it's easier than actually doing their job because of being on tenure. But I think what I want to point out with this question is we often have bias and prejudiced beliefs of what is a good country to live in, especially if you are a white person, where we are taught about like Africa being this dark continent that is dangerous and filled with like warlords and everything. Whereas we have a friend of ours who's really excited to be moving to a country in Africa next year. So it's more in line of what your values are and whether or not that country matches those values. But I would say Korea's been incredibly kind to us, and we never thought that we would end up in Korea at all.
Or Asia.
Or
As a
Asia.
continent.
Yeah. And now because of Korea, I want to travel to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Bali, to like all of these places that introduce me to new ways of thinking and new ways of life that I would have never considered. So I think if the harsh reality is that people are people wherever you go, and no country is perfect. There's no best place to live. There are just places that are actually, conflict zones, like true war zones that you should probably not be going to. But ultimately, you can make any place a home. And so I think what you should strive for is figuring out what values are important to you and whether or not those countries meet those standards. And you can find information on it based on UN websites that determine the capabilities that would meet your needs. But ultimately, like, you can have a great or a terrible time in a country. And unfortunately, I mean, I used to drag on Malta for a lot because of my experience in the country, but it was more of my confronting white girl volunteerism more than the country itself. Because at the end of the day, you can't, like, it's not the country's job to hold your hand and tell you that you're welcome. You have to actually do the effort. So, what is your favorite Korean dish?
So this is hard to answer because I don't have much experience with Korean food. Being lacto-ovo-vegetarian means almost all Korean food is off limits for me because it either has meat or it has fish in it. And if it doesn't have pieces of it in it, it's in the stock.
Yeah.
So it's super difficult for me to eat Korean food in Korea. That being said, traditional Korean dish, makguksu, buckwheat noodle soup. That's literally what makguksu means, is buckwheat noodle soup. And we had a specific variant last summer in Sokcho, which was dongchimi makguksu, which is it's winter kimchi buckwheat noodle soup, where it's fresh kimchi, but it's in like an icy soup, and you ladle it over the ball of noodles that they give you. And it's slightly sweet with Asian pear in it, and I don't remember what else.
Daikon radish, I believe, is because it's a white kimchi. Yeah.
Yeah. But we definitely kind of bastardize Korean food here when at home and do things like gimbap, which is the Korean version of sushi rolls. Much more freedom to put whatever you want in it. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll cook up some veggies we want or some eggs and put some cheese in it and roll it up and eat
Mm-hmm.
delicious
Gimbap.
gimbap. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know that we've made our own kimchi before, and I found that I enjoy making kimchi. We don't have a kimchi refrigerator, and yes, those are a thing. And so unfortunately, the amount of kimchi that we'd have to consume before it starts literally going rancid is like we'd have to eat it like salad bowl sizes. And so I think what I want to strive to do is either we get a small kimchi fridge or
Make
we
less kimchi.
we make it, well, either that or we just like give the majority to our friends as like because we do it around Chuseok, and giving stuff to friends is
Yes.
usually a
The
thing.
traditional time to do it is
Yeah,
to make it at Chuseok. Chuseok is Korean Thanksgiving.
yeah.
It's a
And
week long.
there have been other things that we have had, but I don't know the term for it. We've
Tteokbokki.
tteokbokki. You get a little kind of like iffy after a bit with the texture, right? Because of the
Well,
rice cake.
they're like rice cakes
Hmm.
that are large eraser sized, but after a while the texture gets kind of gummy, and
Hmm.
that it gets really weird for me to eat because
Hmm.
I'm very texture sensitive in my food.
Yeah, I think what I've also noticed is that tteokbokki is literally a snack thing. It's not a full dish, and so people, I think that would be something that we could try to do is have them as smaller or side dishes.
Mhm.
But oh man, I'm super burpy. There was another thing that I didn't realize, but apparently when you have leftover gimbap, you egg fry them in a pan. And that's probably one of my favorite breakfasts is that when we have leftover gimbap rolls, well, I'll just fry it with an egg. And I at first I was like, "Oh, you're going to put seaweed and egg and fry it?" Friends, try it. It's so good.
Egg fried gimbap is amazing.
Yeah, I honestly think that it's probably better than the final
Fresh.
product. Yeah. So I definitely enjoy the process of making kimchi, and I grew up in a household where kimchi was in the fridge all the time because in my part of Virginia we have a huge Korean population, and so my mom liked kimchi. Well, she likes really any sort of cabbage that's fermented. So but I'm like the concept of kimchi or Korean food was never foreign to me, like bulgogi and everything. But we don't do bulgogi here because we're um, vegetarian.
Mhm.
So the education questions. What are the
Yes.
advantages of the educational system in Korea? And do you think that the US could implement any of them? And this is a you question, because I can't answer that.
Um, I'm not super familiar with the local national Korean education system. I can say though that I feel that Koreans as a culture have an unhealthy relationship with education.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is actually going to bleed into, I think, the next educational question, looking at the question list here. But in Korea, everything is based on getting into college from the moment you can walk effectively. Because unlike U.S. universities, where there's lots of universities and you can get in and you can get into university regardless of your grades. Grades might impact which university you're getting into, but you are getting into university if you want to go. In Korea, everything is based around the Korean national entrance exam for the universities, and it's always called like the Korean SAT in English, but it's so much more high stakes than that. Um, you train from the moment you are in kindergarten to take this exam, and the stakes are super high, and the competition is amazingly fierce.
Mm-hmm.
The obsession with it is to the point where they stop all flights in and out of Korea on the day that all students sit this exam because of the noise. They don't want any noise of aircrafts influencing students' ability to concentrate. Businesses will not open until around 10 a.m. to keep the streets clear so that kids can get to their testing sites on time and there's no traffic noise. It's kind of like a shared traumatic experience that all Koreans go through.
Mm-hmm.
But these kids will go to these academies that are called hagwons in Korean, and it's after school. So you go to your regular classes, and then after school, you immediately go to these subject-focused academies, and you study that subject until 10 p.m. And the only reason it stops at 10 is because the Koreans had to pass a law to prevent them from going later.
What is the average that your students have talked about sleeping, like your your juniors and seniors specifically?
Most of the time, if I ask a student how long they slept last night, they say 4 hours. And it's not 4 complete hours. It's like I napped for 2 hours, I got up around 2 a.m. and I kept working. If they've got a test coming up, they may not have slept at all. I've had students come in having not slept in 40 hours because they've been studying for their tests on top of the work that they do outside of school at their academies, at their hagwons.
Yeah, I have complained about hagwons on the Artsy Gamer before, and what I really wish, especially because a lot of your students want to go to the US for the Ivy League schools, is mostly that I wish I could tell them it's like it's not going to be the same, but you also need to realize that the aspects of learning or the way that they prioritize academics in Korea will get you expelled because there is this concept of cheating that occurs in some of your classes. Like you had, didn't like your first year, you had a third of your ninth graders that were caught cheating to some
I
magnitude?
caught a third of my ninth graders cheating. There were probably more that got away with it, but
Mm-hmm.
that was a third of the entire grade level
Mm-hmm.
between me and the other science teacher that was teaching ninth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so Koreans care deeply about their grade, and if it's not a perfect grade, it's a failure. And I know that's an Asian stereotype in the U.S.
It's kind of
Um,
true.
yeah, it is true, and it's a cultural thing that's built around if you are not the most successful, then you can't get what you want in life,
Mm-hmm.
and probably also augmented by issues surrounding like family honor and things like that, which I'm not too familiar with, so I won't make blanket statements that could
Mm-hmm.
easily be said to be wrong on that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know I had a colleague who worked a very long time in China, and they talk about how a lot of ways that groups of Chinese interact when they need to when they're trying to stand in line for something can be crazy to Americans who are more used to queuing. And they mentioned that it's due in very large part to all the starvation that occurred during the Great Leap Forward and the
Mm-hmm.
Cultural Revolution in China, and that if you weren't aggressive in getting your needs met, you were going to die. And that sort of trauma that you experience gets passed down to your children because they need to survive as well, and that passes down and passes down and passes down,
Yeah.
um, just from the way you're raised.
That's called like what
So
is that called genetic trauma? Because I know that there's some link with that with the Holocaust in Jewish families.
epigenetics
Yeah.
is a branch that tells us that things that we experience activate and deactivate certain genes. It doesn't change our DNA, but it changes what's being expressed, and that can be passed
Okay.
down. But from my short time teaching in the U.S., um, teachers don't get respect in the U.S. They don't. Not really. More so from the students, but definitely not from the parents and society in general. When a student was doing poorly when I was teaching them in the U.S., it was my fault as a teacher, and I was pushed to accommodate not the kid's needs, but like not fail kid even if they didn't do anything in my class,
Failing
or
forward.
if they cheated, it was my fault that they cheated because I didn't prepare them enough for things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
since going overseas, that hasn't happened. Other places in the world, not just Korea specific, but like Italy as
Italy, yeah.
well, um, teachers are held with respect and reverence, and I have not been blamed for a student's choices that they have taken the way that I have in the U.S.
So would you say then that the educational in Korea, despite the toxic relationships with academics, that the way that the US could improve its education system is by, well, first and foremost, respecting the teachers who manage it?
Hmm. Yeah, but that's not happening in the U.S. from what we see on the news in recent days. So
Yeah,
I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
which is absolutely a shame. I think I've mentioned this before, is that I often see English, not English teachers, US teachers who have wish lists for their classroom. And I don't shame the fact that teachers that have wish lists. I shame the system for the fact that that's necessary. I'm like, are you telling me that you don't have the money to support a teacher to have basic needs for their classroom? Like, and I'm talking about paper towels and, whiteboard cleaners or anything like that, and you expect them to basically create miracles with absolutely nothing. And
That hasn't even been a recent thing
I
in the
know.
U.S. I remember when I was in elementary school and like first day of second grade, come home with the list of
Yep.
school supply, the classroom supplies, not even just stuff that I'm going to use, but like
Yep.
everyone brings in a couple tissue boxes so that we all have tissues for the year.
Yep. I even had that in private school. So I wonder if they're either they just like made lemonade from lemons with the budget, or if there's actually some communal implications for, here is the thing that I provide as a form of sharing. I don't know, but it's maddening to me. And I do think that one of the benefits of your school in particular is that it does have one of the best packages in that any school is provided for us specifically as a family.
Hmm.
So
I would agree.
yeah, so I think maybe not the maybe not the applications of education in the United States, but definitely the support and training for teachers in order to be able to thrive in their environments. Truly. So then the next question, because it transitions so well, what are some of the adjustments, if any, that you've had to make to your teaching style when you started teaching in Korea?
Massive adjustments. It was a huge cultural shift for me as a teacher. Um, I came from Italy, and Italy is a much more laid back place, educationally speaking. And in Italy, like I would, like when I gave a test, I could let the kids take the test home so they could study it at home, and I didn't have to worry about it. Here in Korea, because everyone's so grade focused, like these academies I talked about, the Hawkwons, will purchase the worksheets and the tests from the students that they take so that they can use those tests to build portfolios on the teachers that the kids have. So, like, if a kid's coming into my chemistry class next year, they may go to the Hawkwon that's like, we have a copy of every test that HubsMod has ever given, and you can study all the past questions. So I have to make new things from scratch every year. I teach in the IB program, and they take a series of exams at the end of their 2-year program as graduation exams, like usually 2 to 3 for every subject they have. And these students will purchase all the past exams that have ever been done in these subjects, and they will rote complete them over and over and over again until they have memorized all of the questions. So I can't include past questions that have been on exams, even on my tests, even as a way to get them to practice, to train, to prepare for these exams, because they've all have them all memorized. And like I'm like, I didn't realize that for my first couple of years, and it's like, wow, all my kids get like all the top grades. And eventually, one kid took me aside and it's like, all of these other students, they go to these Hogwons and they have all these test questions memorized, and that's why they're getting high grades. And I feel bad because I don't go to Hogwons, and I don't have as high of grades of them because I haven't memorized all the test questions, and I felt terrible as a teacher. And I've had to completely change the way that I teach and assess and things like that. And it's been an ongoing struggle for us as a science department that we've been tackling slowly over the years and changing the way that we do assessment practices so that we can overcome this issue.
Do you feel comfortable talking about what the science department at your school is specifically doing in order to change that?
Okay.
Because I think that's
Yeah.
a really cool project that you all have been working on.
We've eliminated grade scales, so it's not like 90 is an A, 70 is a B, 60 is a C that you might know as if you are a U.S. Individual, or maybe it was like 92, 84, 76.
That was
If you
mine.
were at a school that was a little more rigorous in their grading.
Yep.
And I've been in both. But yeah, so instead, what we have is the program publishes a series of written descriptors describing the sort of student that they would expect would earn a certain grade level. In the IB program, it's 1 to 7. It's not A through F, where 7 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. And so we've taken those descriptors and we've broken them into like 8 different strands and made a gigantic rubric where instead of assigning a numerical grade and calculating a final grade at the end, we are going to take all the body of work that they've done over the course of the year and decide where they fit best on each of these categories in the rubric. And it's causing my students to freak out because while my tests have a point value assigned to each question, the point value means nothing to their grade. What I'm looking at is the difficulty of the question, which is not related to the point value. The point value tells us the time that they're expected to take. And whether they were able to answer questions that were directly taught as part of the syllabus. But to earn that 7, the highest score, the written descriptor is that they're able to take answer questions that involve things that they've never seen before, unfamiliar situations. So not that they're expected to study outside the syllabus, but that the skills and processes that they're developing in chemistry over the course of the year, they can apply those in a new and unfamiliar way. So you can't rote memorize for these sorts of questions, and it's really interesting to see the kids where that cutoff is, where all of a sudden it's like they fell off a cliff and they can't answer this question because all they've done up to this point is memorize, and they can't actually apply what they've learned.
I find that really interesting because I know that a lot of your students want to go to the US to the Ivy League schools like Harvard, Brown, Stanford, whatever. And what I think would be helpful for them to realize is that the way that you are designing the way that you measure a student in your department is very much in line to how a college professor like beyond like, you know, with math and things where there is only one right answer and everything, but this notion that the way that a professor measures you as a student is on the basis of the syllabus and how you meet the rubric. And I think I really hope that they may hate it now, but when they go to school and they realize when they're in a different country, they're learning a different culture, they're in a completely different education system, that it's going to do them well in the future within the next year or two.
Well, this ties directly back into the whole premise of our interview today in gaming and education, and that in order to apply what you've learned to something you've never seen before, you have to understand the big picture and how all the pieces fit together. And so this is the sort of skill that a strategy game develops. If you understand the implications of doing this on turn 5 and what you're going to look like 10 turns later in your game because of that, then that type of thinking is the type of thinking you're going to need in my science class.
Wow, you really tied that in perfectly. Go you. That's awesome. Yeah. So, HubsMod, first and foremost, thank you so much for participating in the 1K Q&A and being part of this interview. We do have one more question, and the reason why it stands alone is because this person thought that it wouldn't be asked, and we're absolutely going to answer this question. And you can also find this person on Twitch with a link to their Minecraft gaming in particular. And I'm not shaming this person. They helped develop the Artsy Gamer Discord server, and, you know, they are a family friend. However, Gnomish. Gnomish asks, do you like mushroom stew?
Hell no. I love the flavor of mushrooms, but like I said, I'm very texture persnickety, and the rubberiness of mushrooms can really get under my skin at times.
And this is where we actually differ. I love mushrooms. So you can give me any size of mushroom and I am a happy camper. And so if there was just a thing of mushroom stew, I would be set. And the second one is, would you rather have a half a pound of raspberries or 3 watermelons? This is not a question. Which
half pound of raspberries, and that's because I have a genetic trait which causes watermelon to taste incredibly bitter.
Yeah, and raspberries are just the superior food anyway.
Raspberries are the superior fruit, and anyone who disagrees with me can fight me.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
raspberries and dark chocolate.
So Gnomish is also an admin/mod to the Artsy Gamer and is a fantastic human being. And I would love for you to, if you are on Twitch, to support them and follow them on their Twitch channel. I don't know if they're at affiliate yet, but I think they're striving to get there. So please support this lovely human being. And yeah, got you. So friends, that's it. Thank you so much for being part of this latest episode of Gamers Gab. HubsMod, thank you so much for your presence.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And we will see you next time. In the meantime, make art, play games, and we'll see you later.